The wind had no mercy in the Kural Mountains. It came down from the peaks the way avalanches come. Not as weather, but as judgment, filling the ravines with a sound like the world tearing at its own seams. Milana had learned to read that sound the way other people read clocks. 3 years of surviving alone in the mountains taught you things that no one with a pack would ever need to know. She was checking her rabbit snares along the frozen creek when the other sound reached her. Not wind, not animal. Metal, destroying itself against something immovable. She went still. Her inner wolf, small, suppressed years of deliberate quieting having reduced it to something barely above a whisper, whimpered at the edges of her consciousness. Every survival instinct she had built over 3 years of solitary exile screamed the same thing. Walk away. Lock your door. This is not your war. Then the wind shifted, and she smelled blood. Not human blood. Shifter blood. She went toward it anyway. The black SUV had left the old logging road and met a century-old pine at considerable speed. No plates, armored body panels, bulletproof glass, most of which was no longer in the windows. The driver was dead, his neck broken by the impact. The woman in tactical gear in the passenger seat wasn't breathing. The air was thick with blood and the sharp ozone smell of primal fear. Milana approached carefully, reading every detail. The rear passenger door was jammed. The frame had crumpled in the collision. She braced her boot against the body panel and pulled with everything she had, which wasn't much, because she was an Omega who had spent 3 years actively suppressing whatever wolf strength she possessed. The door screamed and gave way. The back seat was empty, except for an overturned child's car seat. She heard the sound from outside, barely audible, a whimper. She dropped to her knees in the snow and started digging. 10 meters from the wreck, half buried under a fresh drift, she found a bundle of dark gray wool. She uncovered it with hands that had stopped feeling the cold 20 minutes ago, and her heart did something complicated and irreversible. A boy, 6 months old at most. His skin was the color of old wax. His lips had gone blue. His tiny chest moved with the shallow, losing ground rhythm of something fighting a battle it didn't have the strength to win. No, no, no. She stripped her gloves off, and she pulled him against her chest, unzipping her coat, pressing him directly against her skin the way her body understood before her mind did. Warmth. Give him warmth. Give him everything you have. The moment his ice-cold skin touched the hollow of her collarbone, the world stopped. It didn't begin with warmth. It began with fire. A flash of searing, localized agony, as though someone had pressed a brand directly into her flesh. Milana cried out, stumbling backward in the snow, and the wave hit her. Pure, ancient, impossible power ripping through her nervous system from the point of contact outward. Soul bond. The words detonated in her mind. Not a whisper. A roar. She screamed. She didn't let go of the baby. The pain became blinding. Her body convulsed. The infant's scent, milk and frost, and underneath both of those, a crushing, overwhelming aura of dark cedar and wet earth surrounded her entirely. But it wasn't the infant who was her fated mate. It was the bloodline. Magic so ancient and so inextricably bound to a single alpha that the mere proximity of his dying child had forced her dormant soul mark awake. Gasping, tears freezing on her cheeks, Milana pulled her collar aside with shaking fingers. There on her skin, burning with furious gold light, was a freshly scorched crest. And snarling wolf crowned with thorns. She knew that crest. Every wolf in the country knew that crest. It belonged to Artyom, Lord of the North, Alpha King. The man who had recently purged half his own court during a bloody coup attempt. The man rumored to be as cold and merciless as the winters he ruled. She looked at the dying infant in her arms. She looked at the mark on her skin, where she ran. The path back to her cabin was a blur of adrenaline and white-knuckled terror. the storm thickening around her as though the mountains had decided to bury the evidence. She kicked her door shut and threw the iron bolt and dropped to her knees in front of the cast-iron stove before her legs gave way entirely. Come on. Breathe. She stripped the wet wool from the infant and wrapped him in her own blankets, warmed by the fire. She rubbed the circulation back into his tiny hands and feet with the focused desperation of someone who understood that if she stopped, she would start thinking about what she had done. And if she started thinking about that, she would fall apart entirely. The blue at his lips faded. Slowly, miserably slowly. But it faded. His breathing deepened. When the crisis had passed its worst point, Milana sat back on her heels and allowed herself 1 full minute of complete stillness. She looked at the sleeping infant on the sheepskin. She looked at the mark on her collarbone, still pulsing with slow golden light. She thought about the armored vehicle, the professional-grade tactical gear on the dead escorts, the absence of plates or markings, the way the rear door had been caved inward, not by impact with a tree, but by something that had hit the vehicle from behind at speed, deliberately, with intent. This wasn't an accident. Someone had tried to kill the Alpha King's son. The sound of heavy boots on snow reached her wolf hearing before the beam of a tactical flashlight swept across her window. 6 men, moving with the synchronized precision of professionals. Dark tactical gear, no insignia. Enough silver-loaded hardware to bring down a small pack. And at their head, a face she knew from underground Omega networks, whispered warnings passed between the displaced and the exiled. Viktor Petrovich, mercenary, veteran of pack political wars too numerous to count. A wolf who sold his lethal skills to whoever needed them most. These weren't rescuers. Search for the body, Victor's voice carried through the storm. The crash didn't finish the job. The scent trail leads here. Burn the building down if you have to. Milana dropped to the floor. She looked at the sleeping infant. She looked at the old trapdoor beneath the sheepskin rug in the corner, a relic from the Soviet era, barely large enough for 1 person. She looked at the iron bolt on the door, which would hold for perhaps 30 seconds against men of this caliber. Heavy boots hit her front steps. She grabbed the baby, yanked back the rug, hauled up the iron ring, and slid into the frozen black of the root cellar as her front door came off its hinges. The cellar was absolute darkness, and cold that went beyond cold into something else, the cold of underground places that hadn't seen sun in decades. Milana curled around the infant in the blackness, pressing his small face against her shoulder, praying for silence. Boots crossed the floor above her head. Furniture broke, dishes shattered. She's not here, someone reported. But the stove is warm. Someone was just here. A pause, then Victor's voice dropped to a dangerous murmur. I smell an Omega. But there's something else. Strong alpha scent. The boots above stopped moving. Royal mark. The pup's blood is too strong. The Omega must have transferred it. It's take the place apart. If she slipped out the back, she won't get far in this storm. The infant stirred against her shoulder. His small, warm hand shifted, and his fingers touched the fresh mark on her collarbone. The royal crest ignited. In the absolute darkness of the root cellar, the mark flared gold, bright, searing, unmistakable. Bleeding through the gaps in the floorboards above, a beacon of royal magic announcing their location to 6 armed men 3 feet overhead. Milana clapped her hand over it. It was like trying to smother a furnace with a glove. Wait. Victor's voice went dangerously quiet. Did you see that? Through the floorboards. The boots turned, began moving toward the center of the room. She heard the heavy scrape of the ash box being shoved aside. There's a hollow under the floor. Pull back the rug. See, Milana looked desperately for anything she could use as a weapon. There was nothing. She was an Omega with no pack, no combat training, and no options, cornered in a hole in the ground with a royal infant, while professional killers stripped the floorboards from above. Then the world outside her cabin exploded. Not with sound, with pressure. The air in the cellar dropped so fast her ears rang. Something immense and ancient and utterly without mercy descended on the surrounding forest. An alpha command amplified to a scale she had never encountered, had never imagined possible. Her own suppressed wolf didn't flinch. It collapsed inside her, baring its throat in instinctive, paralyzed reverence. Then the roar came. A sound that went through the walls and into the stone beneath and continued downward. A sound of absolute, primal rage that shattered what remained of the windows. Outside, a man screamed. The scream stopped with a wet, definitive sound. The shooting started. Automatic weapons fire, silver rounds, completely, immediately useless. Above her head, the floor shook as bodies struck the walls. Hardened mercenaries made sounds she had never heard from hardened mercenaries. The smell of blood, hot copper, overwhelming, dripped through the gaps in the floorboards. Viktor Petrovich, whose voice she had last heard ordering her building burned down, said Artyom, in the tone of a man who had spent his career cultivating fearlessness and had just discovered the floor on that. "You dared touch my blood," came the reply. Milana stopped breathing. The voice was smooth, quiet, vibrating with a dark, killing resonance that made the gold mark on her skin pulse in agonizing synchronization. This was a voice that had commanded armies, a voice that ruled the northern territories with an iron grip, a single heavy impact. The sound of a spine breaking. Viktor Petrovich's heartbeat, which she had been tracking through the chaos, simply stopped. Then absolute stillness. Only the wind through the shattered windows. Slow, measured footsteps crossed the destroyed floor above her, stopped at the center of the room. The trapdoor's iron hook lifted. "I know you're down there." The dark voice cut through the silence, precise and calm. "My son's scent masks yours, but I feel the pull. Open the door, or I'll take the floor apart to reach him." Shaking, Milana shifted the infant to one arm and reached up with the other. She didn't have to push. The moment the latch clicked, the heavy oak door was torn upward with a force that ripped the hinges clean out of the wood. Blinding white light from tactical flashlights poured into the pit. "Lower the weapons." The light softened. Milana forced her eyes open and looked up. The man crouching at the edge of the trapdoor looked like he had been sculpted from the mountains outside. Artyom, Lord of the North, was massive, shoulders filling the opening completely, expensive charcoal coat torn and soaked with the blood of Viktor's men, jaw set hard with 3 days of dark stubble. But it was his eyes that pinned her. Ice blue with the deep crimson ring of an alpha whose beast was dangerously close to the surface. He looked at the bundle in her arms. A flash of profound relief crossed his brutal features so quickly she almost missed it. "Well, give him to me," he said, extending one large blood-covered hand into the cellar. Milana's protective instincts, magnified by the unnatural bond she had formed with the infant, flared white. She pressed the boy closer and backed against the earthen wall. "Your people are dead," she said. Her voice came out rough with cold and fear. "The ones in the SUV. They were run off the road deliberately. Those men. I'm aware of the situation," Artyom said, in a tone that left no room for negotiation. "Give me my son." Milana looked at his blood-soaked hands. She hesitated. His eyes narrowed. The crimson ring flared. He dropped into the cellar without using the ladder, completely soundless for his size. The space, already suffocating, became something else entirely. His scent hit her in full force. Dark cedar, ozone, and underneath those things, the same deep bass note as the infant in her arms. Mature, devastating, precisely matched. "I won't repeat myself, Omega," he said, stepping into her space. When he reached for the child, his bare fingers slid across the exposed skin of her neck where her collar had shifted. The The reaction was instantaneous. A shockwave of pure energy detonated in the confined space. Artyom exhaled sharply, stepping back, his eyes going wide with absolute shock. Milana cried out as the golden crest on her neck blazed with blinding intensity, burning through the fabric of her clothing, flooding the dark earthen cellar with unmistakable light. Royal seal, soul right, burning on the skin of an exiled Omega with no name and no pack. Artyom stared at her neck. The color drained from his face. He looked at his own hand, then back at her. "Impossible," he whispered. The voice of the merciless Alpha King, for the first time, sounded completely lost. "You're a nameless Omega." "I didn't ask for this," Milana said. Tears ran down her face from cold and fear and everything else. "I was just trying to warm him. The second I touched him, it burned itself into me. I don't want it." Artyom stood motionless. His chest heaved as he looked at the glowing crest of his own bloodline seared onto her skin. The soul bond that had slept through all 35 years of his life sang in his blood with sudden, furious, deafening certainty, demanding he claim the terrified woman in front of him. His trained political mind rejected it immediately. An Omega as true mate to the Alpha King was a death sentence on the brutal stage of pack court politics. It was a weakness his enemies would exploit within hours. "Sergei," he said without breaking eye contact with Milana. A tall, blond man with a deep scar bisecting one cheek appeared at the edge of the trapdoor. "Pull them both out," Artyom ordered. He climbed out of the cellar without looking back. "Call heavy transport. We move to Diamond Fortress immediately." "Both of them, sire?" Sergei asked, with obvious confusion. "Standard protocol for civilian witnesses." "She's not a witness," Artyom said, with a lethal warning in his voice that ended the conversation. The boys' temperature stabilized, but their scents have bonded. "If we separate them now, the shock will kill my heir." A pause. One final unreadable glance over his shoulder at Milana. "Take the Omega. She belongs to the crown now." They airlifted her out of the Birch settlement in a heavy, armored helicopter that made the storm look like inconvenience. 2 hours across the jagged Ural peaks, while Artyom sat across from her in the warm leather cabin and looked at her with the calculating eyes of a man doing very rapid political mathematics. "Your name," he said. "Milana Volkova. Human surname. No pack registration in the National Registry." His beta Sergei read this from a secured tablet without looking up. "You're a ghost." "I'm an exile," Milana said. The fear hadn't left her, but something underneath it had hardened. "That's different. I don't attack packs. I just want to be left alone." "You chose a poor day for that," Artyom said. She told him everything. The crash, the dead escorts, the dying infant in the snow, the soul mark burning itself into her without permission. She kept her voice flat and factual, in desperately needing him to understand she was collateral damage in a war she hadn't chosen. Artyom listened without expression. When she finished, he looked at Sergei. "The SUV was rammed from behind at high speed," Sergei confirmed quietly. "Deliberate. The driver and nurse died on impact. Viktor Petrovich didn't have the intelligence network to track a classified royal transport route on his own." A pause. "This was inside work, my lord. Only 3 people on the High Council had those coordinates." He hesitated, including Lady Irina. Milana watched Artyom's hands close into fists on his knees. The leather of his gloves creaked. Lady Irina. She knew the name from gossip papers at the diner where she worked nights. Irina of the Crescent Pack, high-born alpha female. Artyom's politically arranged bride-to-be. The alliance meant to unite the northern and eastern territories. "Irina has no motive to kill my son," Artyom said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Unless," Sergei said carefully, "she doesn't want to raise a bastard from a dead human mistress. If Alyosha disappears, her future bloodline from you faces no competition for the throne." The silence in the helicopter became suffocating. Milana pressed herself against the window and tried to be invisible. Diamond Fortress earned its name. Cut directly into the granite face of an enormous mountain above an untouched frozen alpine lake, the compound was a masterwork of brutal architecture. Dark steel, reinforced glass, black stone fusing seamlessly with an uncompromising landscape. It radiated the concentrated authority of something very old and very powerful that had never been seriously threatened. When the helicopter landed on the floodlit pad, Milana stepped out into a gauntlet of royal guards and staff. They bowed deeply to Artyom, but their eyes went immediately to Milana, widening as they caught the impossible scent of royal magic emanating from her skin. The mark pulsed slow and golden at her collarbone. "Eastern Wing," Artyom ordered, without looking at her. "Give her everything needed for the boy's care. Post guards at her door. She doesn't leave those rooms." Milana's head came up sharply. "I saved your son's life, and you're locking me up like a prisoner." Artyom closed the distance between them in 2 steps. He lowered his head until his lips were inches from her ear. "You're a complication, Milana Volkova." His breath burned against her frozen skin. "You carry my mark, but you are not my intended. You're a target. Whoever tried to kill my son today will come for you the moment they learn you carry the royal soul seal. You are a prisoner here, yes." He straightened. His eyes held nothing warm. "It's the only reason you're still breathing." The Eastern Wing was a gilded vault. Vast, silk-draped rooms overlooking the frozen lake, fireplaces tall enough to stand in, a cradle that cost more than everything Milana had owned in the past 3 years combined. The titanium locks on the mahogany doors and the 2 armed guards in the corridor kept the reality from being confused with luxury. The pack's head physician, Dr. Eris, a spare, precise wolf who smelled of chamomile and surgical alcohol, examined them both and delivered his report with the dispassion of someone accustomed to impossible things. The boy's core temperature had dropped to fatal levels, he said, reviewing Alyosha's vitals while the infant slept. By every physiological measure, the hypothermia should have stopped his heart. He looked at Milana with an expression she couldn't quite read. "It didn't because of you." The ancient magic in the king's bloodline recognized the child was dying. It went looking for an anchor. It found your suppressed wolf, bypassed every known biological law, and forged a soul bond with the boy's father in order to channel alpha power through you and into the child. "So I'm a conduit," Milana said. "A battery." "You're an anomaly," Dr. Eris said gently. "Ye alpha kings don't have fated soulmates. Their bloodlines are too volatile. They choose their moons based on political stability, not divine whim." He gestured vaguely toward her neck. "That mark overturns centuries of Northern territorial law. Be very careful who sees it." He was gone less than an hour before the locks disengaged. Milana was on her feet instantly, placing herself between the door and the cradle. The woman who entered was devastatingly beautiful in the way of ice sculptures, cold, precise, and designed to be looked at. Custom emerald wool dress, platinum hair immaculately arranged, eyes of predatory amber that found Milana and immediately filled with contempt. The scent that hit her was overwhelming. Crushed roses and ozone, each with a bitter metallic undertone that Milana's wolf recognized without needing to be told. Dominant female. Apex rank. "So this is the stray," the woman said, her heels clicking across the hardwood. "That my fiancé dragged in from the storm. You must be Lady Irina." The smile she received didn't reach the amber eyes. "And you must be the Omega, who overstayed her welcome." Irina began moving toward the cradle. "I heard you've been playing nursemaid to the royal bastard." Touching, if pathetic. Milana stepped into her path. A low, involuntary growl vibrated from somewhere deep in her chest, ridiculous against an alpha of this rank, but the protective instinct overrode everything. Irina stopped. A cruel laugh fell from her perfect lips. "Careful, little dog. Bare your teeth at a superior alpha and you tend to lose them." She leaned in, eyes narrowing, and took a slow breath near Milana's shoulder. The amber eyes flew wide. Irina's hand shot forward with the speed of a striking snake. Her manicured nails closed around Milana's collar and yanked it down. The royal crest blazed gold on Milana's skin. Irina reeled back as though struck. Then the mask collapsed. Everything beneath it was ugly, cornered, and willing to do whatever was necessary. "This is a trick," she hissed. "Artyom is mine," Milana said, yanking her collar back into place. "I didn't ask for this. I don't want your king, or your politics. I just want to leave." Irina's shock curdled into something more dangerous. The atmospheric pressure in the room dropped as she released her alpha aura, and the suppression drove Milana to her knees, fighting for breath while dominant magic compressed her chest. "Well, you think you can just leave?" Irina crouched over her, one hand closing around Milana's jaw with bruising force. "If the council sees that mark, they'll void my marriage contract. They'll demand Artyom take you as his moon to honor the goddess's will, and I will not surrender my crown to a gutter Omega." She leaned close. Her nails broke skin. "You will hide that mark. You'll tell Artyom the bond is fading. Because if you say one word about this to the council, I won't just kill you. I'll make sure that bastard joins his dead mother before the first thaw." She stood, straightened her dress, and walked to the door without looking back. "Enjoy the silk sheets, Stray. They'll make a lovely shroud." 2 floors below, in the underground war room, Artyom was losing a battle he couldn't shoot. He stood at the head of a holographic tactical table, surrounded by his senior commanders, attempting to analyze the assassination attempt's operational details, and his body was staging a full revolt. Since leaving Milana in the Eastern Wing 48 hours ago, a gnawing, bone-deep hunger had taken up residence in his chest. Not physical. Something far older and more fundamental than hunger. His inner wolf, usually disciplined, usually cold, usually the precise instrument of his will, was throwing itself against the bars of his control in a continuous, maddening demand. Mate. Protect. Claim. Her scent, faint lavender and pine and the specific, clean essence of a deeply suppressed Omega, overrode tactical briefings and the smells of his generals. He felt her fear. It seeped through the supernatural thread connecting their souls. A cold spike of terror that made his canines extend involuntarily. "Sire," Sergei said carefully, noting the whitening of Artyom's knuckles on the edge of the table. "Are you—" Then the burning hit. Searing psychic agony detonating at his collarbone. A distress signal so powerful and so sudden that Artyom lurched forward, scattering tactical tablets across the floor. He felt her pain. He felt a crushing, dominant aura pressing down on his mate. Someone was hurting her. Logic, politics, and the 3-month timeline to his wedding disappeared in a millisecond. Artyom's eyes opened, blazing, radioactive crimson. A sound left his throat that silenced the war room instantly. He was out the door before anyone could ask a question. He didn't wait for the elevator. He hit the emergency stairs and took them in 4-step strides, moving with predatory speed that turned the concrete walls into a blur, the bond pulling him like a compass needle finding north. He found his 2 royal guards unconscious in the corridor outside her rooms, bruising on their throats. Professional work. He kicked the mahogany doors off their frame. Milana was on the floor beside the cradle. A thin thread of blood ran from her jaw. The heavy, nauseating perfume of crushed roses hung in the air. Irina. He crossed the room in a moment, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands, made to break things, were surprisingly careful against her face. Milana. The crimson in his eyes scanned her pale features. Who did this? She flinched from his touch, pressing her back against the base of the cradle, arms wrapped around her knees. "Don't. Just stay away from me." "Who?" "Your future moon," she said, as wiping the blood from her jaw with a shaking hand. She came to look at the bastard. She saw the mark. She knows. Her eyes found his. It was her, Artyom. You know it was her. She organized the crash, and now she's going to finish what she started because I'm in the way. Artyom went completely still. He had built his rule on cold calculation. He had agreed to Irina's betrothal to secure the eastern border, fully aware she was ruthless and ambitious. He had believed Alyosha was safe in a hidden mountain safe house. He had been catastrophically wrong on every count. The political chessboard he had managed so carefully ignited and burned to ash in his mind. This woman curled in front of him, trembling in a borrowed silk robe, or who had walked into a blizzard for a child she didn't know, and now bore his mark and had been threatened with death for it, was the other half of his soul. And the woman he was supposed to marry had just tried to kill them both. Artyom reached past her flinch and pulled her carefully against his chest. She went rigid. Then his scent wrapped around her, dark cedar, winter, something steady, and the crushing residue of Irina's attack dissolved. Her suppressed wolf, which had spent 3 years learning to make itself small and silent, made a sound that wasn't quite a whimper and wasn't quite relief. Something between the two. "She will not touch you," Artyom said into her hair. His voice resonated through the soul bond like a vow struck in iron. "She will not touch my son." He pulled back just enough to look at her. The crimson in his eyes was fading to ice blue. Burning, decided. Clear. "To hell with the politics," said the Alpha King. "I'm going to take her empire apart." The High Council chamber was carved from the mountain's granite heart, capped with a dome of glass through which the storm pressed its gray face. The air was thick with the competing scents of the most powerful wolf elites in the country. 4 days had passed since Milana was pulled from her cabin. 4 days in which Artyom had woven a net fine enough to catch a crescent moon alpha. He sat at the head of an obsidian table in full military dress, silver epaulets catching the light. Sergei stood at his right. Lady Irina sat at his left in severe black silk and diamonds, performing grief with practiced precision, a supporting, bereaved fiancé. Her father, supreme alpha of the East, is Nikolai, radiated the expensive confidence of a man accustomed to outcomes he'd arranged in advance. "The tragedy of the royal transport cannot be overstated," Nikolai began. "But, Artyom, we must look forward. The eastern border is vulnerable without a unified front. Accelerate the wedding. Irina is ready to give you a true, pure-blooded heir." Irina's manicured fingers rested gently over Artyom's gloved hand. "My heart breaks for you," she murmured, in perfect pitch fabricated sorrow. Artyom didn't pull his hand away. The temperature in the room dropped. "Strength," he said. "Yes. We should tear out the rot entirely." He pressed a button on his chair. The obsidian table hummed to life with a classified holographic financial record. 2 weeks ago, Sergei announced into dead silence, a transfer of 10 million was routed from an offshore account in the Caymans to a shell corporation called Vanguard Capital, Viktor Petrovich's established contract laundering vehicle. He paused. The Cayman account belongs to a private trust fund registered to the Crescent Moon Pack. Collective intake of breath around the table. Irina's hand left Artyom's arm. "This is outrageous," Nikolai erupted. "You're accusing my family of financing an assassination." "It's a financial record," Artyom said calmly. "Would you like to call it a forgery?" He pressed another button on his chair. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the chamber opened. 2 armored royal guards entered. Between them walked a woman who commanded every eye in the room, not through dominance, but through something that stopped thought entirely. An impossible, unnatural pull that had no name. Milana walked into the light. The royal tailors had dressed her in midnight blue velvet that matched Artyom's military colors exactly. Her dark hair was swept up, exposing the long, elegant line of her neck. And in her arms, wrapped in royal silver and black, lay Alyosha. The boy was awake. His small hands reached up for a strand of Milana's hair, and his scent hit the room like a detonation. The unmistakable pulse of Alpha King's blood, vital and present. "The prince," breathed a senior Alpha. "He's alive?" Irina rose so fast her chair overturned. Every pretense of grief evaporated, replaced by the naked panic of a calculated plan, encountering reality. "This is a trick," she hissed, canines extending. "That is not the royal heir. This is an illusion. Guard. Seize her." No one moved. Artyom stood. The crushing weight of his alpha aura dropped over the chamber, driving half the council to their knees. He walked the length of the obsidian table without hurrying, his eyes never leaving Irina. "You seeded the clouds above Birch Settlement," he said. His voice was the quiet before an avalanche. "You paid Viktor Petrovich to run my son's vehicle off the road, and when that failed, you bypassed my security and threatened to kill the woman who saved his life." He stopped directly before her. "Did I miss anything?" "She's manipulating you," Irina screamed. Her composure had ceased to exist. "She's nobody. She's a gutter Omega. She can't hold a soul bond with a king. She holds mine." Artyom turned from Irina and walked back to Milana. He stopped in front of her. With infinite gentleness, he moved aside the velvet at her collar. The council chamber detonated into silence. On her skin, burning gold and undeniable, blazed the royal crest. The snarling wolf, crowned with thorns, pulsed in perfect synchrony with Artyom's own heartbeat. "The fate mark," Nikolai whispered, horror hollowing out his voice. The goddess made her choice. Irina lunged across the table. She didn't cover half the distance. Artyom caught her in mid-air. One shattering impact drove her into the center of the obsidian surface. The stone cracked. Irina gasped, clawing at the hand at her throat, while Artyom's eyes went fully crimson above her. "Treason," he said. "Attempted murder of the royal heir. Threat against the Luna of the Northern Territories." He looked at Nikolai, who had already fallen to his knees. "Your position is revoked. Your pack's assets are frozen. Your daughter will live out what remains of her life in the deepest cell Diamond Fortress has." He released Irina to the waiting guards. The oak doors closed. Silence reclaimed the chamber. Artyom walked back to Milana. His eyes had returned to ice blue, and something in them changed as they settled on her. Something that had been locked behind calculation and Cold War for a very long time, loosened without his permission. He raised his hand and traced the edge of the gold mark. Milana leaned into his touch before she could stop herself. "You said I was a prisoner here," she said quietly. Artyom pressed his forehead to hers. "You are bound to me," he said, "as I am permanently bound to you." His voice was the quietest she had ever heard it. Nothing performing in it. Nothing strategic. Just the sound of a man who had spent his entire life choosing cold, standing at the threshold of something warmer than he knew how to name. "You are no longer an exile. You are the Lady of the North." Milana released a long, unsteady breath, and the last of the fear she'd been carrying since the crash. Since 3 years before the crash, if she was honest, went with it. "Then I suppose," she said, "I should probably learn to rule." The storm that had battered Diamond Fortress for 4 days broke at dawn. Milana stood at the panoramic windows as light moved across the Ural peaks, turning the snow to fire. The weight of an impossible crown was new and strange, and nothing like what she had imagined for herself in 3 years of surviving alone on a mountain. The bond made it real. The constant, warm second heartbeat beneath her own. The presence that filled the silence that had lived in her chest for so long, she had stopped noticing it as absence. Artyom came to stand behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist. His chin rested on her shoulder, and their scents, dark cedar and quiet pine, wove together without effort, the way things that belong together do. In the nursery behind them, Alyosha's small, steady breathing filled the room. A dying infant in the snow had not simply saved an exiled woman's life. He had thawed a king's.